Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all to the last session of a beautiful conference on the last day. Post-lunch sessions are very difficult to manage, I know, but hopefully we'll keep you all awake. So just some announcements for the speakers that request to stick to time of 10 minutes. And since this is the last session of the day, and we need to follow it up with the award ceremony as well as the conclusion, so I'll request everyone to stick to their time. Before we move on, let me request the expert panel for poster review is requested to proceed to the poster exhibit area from 3 to 4. The expert panelists are Professor Amtul Zari, Dr. Asmat Usmani, Dr. Khairun Nissa, Dr. Mona Zafar. Kindly proceed at 3 p.m. to the poster area. And I also request the poster presenters to be there at least 15 minutes before your allotted time so that you can present your poster in a better way. So let's start the session. This session is about artificial intelligence. As in any walk of life, we know that AI has kind of taken over. And the idea is to make your life easy as clinicians. And obviously, it's to improve the patient care and identify high-risk pregnancies as well as predict complications and guide us for better treatment decisions. And I hope it stays on that and we don't go out of business. But I believe that I was discussing at an AI conference once that, gynecologists hopefully would stay because our work might not be taken over by robots as easily as other specialties. So I'll request the panelists to proceed to the stage. Professor Alia Bashir, who's the chairperson of OBGYN and in the committee UHS Lahore. She's the director DME and chairperson Research Grant Board, Allama Iqbal Medical College. I'll request her to come to the stage. I guess they'll be joining us in a short while. Professor Farat Naz, Professor OBGYN in AIMC Lahore. She had to rush for an emergency. Probably she'll join in the middle of the session. Professor Ghazala Mahmood, Professor OBGYN, Islamabad Institute of Reproductive Medicine. Dr. Huma Sheikh, Consultant OBGYN, Government Maternity Hospital Gujranwala, Advisor Member Committee, Climate Change and Sustainability, RCOG. I'll request her to come to stage. Professor Nadia Khurshid, Head of Department, OBGYN, Unit 5, King Edward Medical University, Lahore and Lady Aitchison Hospital. Dr. Nazneen Iqbal, Head of Department, OBGYN, Shaheed Saifur Rahman Government Teaching Hospital, Gilgit. Dr. Nazneen Iqbal, Head of Department, Obs and Gynae. Okay. Dr. Noreen Akmal, Visiting Consultant, Fatma Jinnah Medical University, and she was the principal of FJMU. Professor Nudrat Suhail, Professor OBGYN, Amiruddin Medical College, PGMI Lahore, and Director Medical Education, AMC. Kindly proceed to the... Professor Shamsa Hamayu, Visiting Consultant and previous Head of Department, Gangaram Hospital, Lahore. Right. So I guess they'll be joining us soon. So let me invite the first speaker, who needs no introduction really, Professor Mohammad Tayyab, who is lead IVF consultant at Life Center Hamid Latif Hospital, professor and dean at Gulab Devi Hospital, Al-Alim Medical College, and was the principal of Amiruddin Medical College. He'll be speaking to us about future strategies in OBGYN.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies. I said ladies because I don't see, oh, there is a gentleman. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, organizers of the conference, for giving me this opportunity to speak here. After having attended all 3 days of fully packed halls of 500 people, I find that people had to leave, so there are very few people left. But I'll just continue with the duty assigned to me, which was to speak a little bit about a vision of the future in obstetrics and gynecology. And originally, the length of this talk was a little longer, so I'll just show you where this came from. My interest in this subject developed just a little while ago. I started looking at the cutting edge of what's happening in various fields and what reflection for current practitioners and future youngsters with obs and gynae. This was a paper that came about a few years ago, The Future of Obs and Gynae in 2020, a clear vision. Why is a change necessary? And I think other than change, it's evolution as well, which is equally important. But once I stumbled upon this excellent Clinics in North America series of Obs and Gynae in December 2021. It really opened the doors for me to kind of explore the various aspects, some of which I'm going to talk about right now. So the areas of reflection in the future that I'm going to touch upon, actually, simulation in Obs and Gynae, what's happening in contraception, what's happening in fetal surgery, what's happening in robotic surgery, and a little bit to conclude on social media superpowers. Because of paucity of time, I am not going to reflect on 4 other aspects which I had originally covered in previous talks: infertility, screening in cancer, the issue of subspecialization in Obs and Gynae, and the issue of induction and burnout in obstetricians and gynecologists, which within themselves are very interesting subjects. So I'm going to talk about the first 5, giving a couple of minutes to each one of them. Simulation in Obs and Gynae. It was introduced in the 19th century originally, and then there was a gap up to the 17th century, and it began with wooden birthing and pelvic models. And then phantoms were introduced by the father of British midwifery, William Smellie. But it is now considered the simulation is the mainstay of safe patient care in virtually all specialties of medicine and surgery. And now research has confirmed that there is improvement in teamwork and communication and advancement in medical knowledge when you use simulation. But there is obviously a difference between low fidelity simulation and high fidelity simulation, which involves personnel, human resource, and cost factors as well. And whenever the simulation process takes place, basically it follows the same principle of pre-briefing, simulation process itself, and then debriefing. So what can we use? Task trainer, what is involved? Personnel only. It may require an observer. Any location can be used. And low to medium, and that particularly for low resource countries like ours, it is not expensive, and probably that can be used. What about full body mannequin? And the first time I saw that was more than a decade ago. Usually several participants are needed to form a team and simulationists, and it's basically a full immersion clinical simulation, typically in a simulation center, so you need a resource for that as well, and it's definitely more expensive. Then using hybrid models like patient actor participants and team may be involved. This is also a full immersion clinical simulation of medium fidelity. And then virtual reality, VR, which is used more and more over the last decade, using the participant only, and that's also is full immersion and sometimes quite expensive, obviously. This is lying in the museum called the Louvre. If anybody has been to Paris and been to the Louvre, the machine obstetric simulator of Madame du Coudray, which was a birthing simulator used many, many decades ago. And this is basically the one on display is a wicker leather fabric sponge version. These are the modern versions, called Noel, full patient mannequin with a motorized mechanism of pushing. So obviously if you're teaching somebody normal labor and you have a motorized mechanism, that's useful and interesting. The American Board of Obs and Gynae recognized laparoscopy in 1971. And now they have a full FLS, which is Fundamentals of Laparoscopic Surgery module in mandatory training. And you are aware that SEM was a German invented laparoscopy in 1985, first lab training device in a box trainer, and people used to go to Europe to get trained in that. Today, there is a heavy reliance on computer programs to mimic real life, and we have modified beef tongue models for 4th degree perineal laceration simulations. And we have simulators for sonography, for forceps, for CVS, for amnio, for percutaneous umbilical blood sampling and fetal surgery. And then there are Ovine models for robotic hysterectomy. Then there are other models like the Victoria Obstetric Simulator. This comes from a company called Gomar Scientific, and Operative Experience, which is another type of simulator. They're really very close to real-life simulations. Mama Natalie Hybrid Birth Simulator, which is attached to an actual woman, and you can make that model bleed, and the patient can make the appropriate noises along with that. And then obviously prompt, we're all aware of the prompt, and I think the RCOG also has it on its website. And then definitely the VR models, like a Lap Mentor simulator from 3D Systems using VR, which is very futuristic. One other I stumbled upon, which I thought was very interesting, was a Sine cadaver Florida, costing $60,000 for each cadaver, but it mimics actual cadaver with tissue layers, blood vessels, and nerves when you're teaching surgery. I thought that was interesting. What's happening in contraceptives? Contraceptive vaginal ring, CVR. Nuva ring has been introduced. An Anovida has been introduced. You insert within 5 days of menses, you remove for a week after 3 weeks. Then progesterone-only ring has gone into a 28-day trial, and ulipristal acetate has also brought out a ring. And then a non-hormonal called Ovaprene, which has ferrous gluconate and ascorbic acid knitted polymer barrier to impair sperm penetration. This is Anovida. This is how it looks like. Then about transdermal patch called Ortho-Evra and Xulane. And there's one called Twirla, which has got equine estrogen and levonorgestrel, applying on buttocks and upper arm, lower abdomen, and the new patch every 3 weeks. Obesity definitely is known to lower the efficacy of that, and these are how they look like. Progesterone-only pills and others, mini pills using the same each day with a 3-hour window. The problem with POP, obviously, is if you don't take it within that time, there is a problem with that. Slind is a new one, which is 4 milligram drospirenone-only pill for 24 consecutive days. And this is the first promise, which is, it gives you more than 3 hours. It gives you a 24-hour missed pill window. So that may be one of the futures. And in 2020, FDA approved Phexxi, which is a gel with lactic acid, citric acid, and potassium biotartrate. That's what it looks like. And then progesterone implants, we know that Nexplanon definitely is available, Jadel is available, and Sino Implant 2 is for 3 years. The only problem with implants, as we all aware, is serious neurovascular injury possibility. And then new contraceptives, one is called Mona Lisa, good fancy names, Vidacept, and Ballerine, which causes less cramping and low perforation. Frameless contraceptives like Gynefix and Fibroplant, these have come in the market as well. And upcoming in contraception, the first one I like really, jewelry. Just wear it around your neck and the partner knows that there's a jewelry. Oral gelatin capsule, biodegradable microneedle containing skin patch, and self-removal methods. Fetal surgery, well, presently invasive procedures correct or ameliorate, and fetoscopy is one of them, and the future of robotic surgery is phebotics. The problem is the fetal membrane repair, which is the Achilles heel there, really. In utero stem cell and gene therapy, and we need an ex utero support system. I think the bell is rung, so I'll just skip the rest of this. But definitely we need team members for that. Definitely fetal surgery goes through, its level of invasions is different. Just one comment on stem cells. This is experimental, and there are people who would claim that they're not doing it they are doing it clinically, which is probably not true. And then gene therapy also indicated in Wilson's disease, muscle diseases, and hemophilia, very much experimental at the moment. Definitely for fetal surgery, we need artificial womb and placental design, which is basically in lambs, and that's where we do that. A couple of comments on robotic surgery. Despite controversies, it continues to grow. The Da Vinci system was introduced in the year 2000, FDA approved in 2005, and in 2018 alone in USA, 265,000 operations were done, the highest after general surgeries, really come up. These are the difference in ergonomics, and it's claimed that ergonomics of robotics is much superior. And these are various types of systems that are now available. Definitely, I just focus on the last line, that new studies confirm shorter operating time, hospital stay, less blood loss, less post-op complications, and even with worse adhesive disease, obesity, or large uteri. Robotic surgery platforms, numerous platforms that are available worldwide, and future refinements would be better visualization, haptic feedback, which is very interesting, reduction of overall footprint, making it more compact. Right now, they're occupying whole sizes of the theater, decrease size and number of incisions, and combining virtual reality and AI. Okay, last 2 slides. Social media superpowers. Well, social media was a term used first time in 2004. At the moment, 4 billion people use social media. It's a ubiquitous form of communications, and doctors have a duty to provide information. The only thing that we need to look at, these are the various and how much people are using it. This is the last slide, that whenever, if we use social media as responsible doctors, we ask ourselves these questions, like what is the purpose of this post? Does it engage my audience? Does it align with my voice or brand? Is there anything negative about patients or colleagues? Is there anything that could be viewed as offensive? And do I feel okay about reading this? I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
So our next speaker is Dr. Rehana Yasmin, Assistant Professor, Department of Gynae and Obstetrics, Ziauddin University Hospital. She'll be talking to us about evaluation of effectiveness of emergency ops and neonatal skills training among participants in Ziauddin University.
Assalamu alaikum. So the topic of my presentation is evaluation of effectiveness of emergency obstetric and neonatal skills training among participants at Ziauddin University, Karachi. Obstetric emergencies are usually sudden and unpredictable, may lead to maternal death and morbidity. In principle, most maternal deaths are preventable if successful management responds in a quick, rapid, and coordinated way. Approximately 800 women die every year globally because of the preventable causes, primarily due to pregnancy and childbirth, from which around 99% of the deaths occurred in countries which are underdeveloped. Pakistan Maternal Mortality Survey 2019, conducted by National Institute of Population Studies, reveals considerable demographic differences between rural and urban areas of Pakistan. The maternal mortality rate is nearly 26% higher in rural areas as compared to urban areas due to a major difference in healthcare services provided to the people in urban areas as compared to those living in distant regions. A recent survey revealed that 62% of the rural women of reproductive age are uneducated, which is significantly higher than the percentage of uneducated urban women. Women who are educated are more likely to seek prenatal care. In Pakistan, approximately 96% of the women with education received prenatal care from a doctor, compared to 50% of women without education. Another contributing factor to the MMR is cost, as evident by the fact that 1/3 of pregnant women in Pakistan do not seek prenatal care, especially because it is deemed unnecessary or, more importantly, too expensive. So the objective of my study is to evaluate the long-term impact of small competency-based training workshops. This was a cross-sectional study based on one-to-one interview and was conducted at Obstetric and Gynecology Department of Ziauddin University, Karachi, Pakistan from 2023 to 2024. 95 participants, medical students, PGs, midwives, etc., who attended the emergency obstetric and neonatal care skills workshop during past 3 years were interviewed with their informed consent. The evaluation was done with the help of a questionnaire, and the data was analyzed by SPSS. So the workshop design is, this is a training workshop. The training included 3 days workshop, the whole course material comprising of 11 modules, divided over 3 days. Day 1 included resuscitation, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and neonatal resuscitation, obstetric hemorrhage, risk management, pre-eclampsia and eclampsia. Day 2 included early pregnancy complications, sepsis, maternal and neonatal both, and assisted delivery. Day 3 included obstructed labor, obstetric fistula, common obstetric emergencies, and complications of stages of labor. Each module comprises of 20-minute lecture followed by 30 minutes interactive breakup sessions for active hands-on practice for each participant, and the participants are divided into 3 groups after every lecture for hands-on. Pre-test and post-test conducted before and after the workshop with an evaluative approach and learning. Total number of workshops from 2010 to 2024 is 103. This is a big achievement. We have done 103 workshops during the last 14 years. Approximate number of participants who have been trained is 2,060. Fourth-year MBBS students who attended the workshop are 1,800. Midwife and doctors trained up till now are 260. And participants in the current study who have been interviewed are 95. So this is the same data. A pro forma results. A pro forma was introduced to the participants to evaluate the long-term impact of IMNOC training in improving clinical skills, which included questions regarding the impact of these workshops. Out of 95% in the current study, 52% were MBBS students, 21% were postgraduate trainees, 15% were midwives, and 10% were the master trainers, which have been trained by us. This is the representation of that data. So results are majority of the participants showed positive attitude towards the workshop, and 95% of the participants demonstrated improved skills while dealing obstetric emergencies like maternal collapse, hemorrhage, preeclampsia, eclampsia, etc. 40% of the participants suggested further workshops to refresh their knowledge. And 95% showed improved school skills, and 5% is no change. It means that they are not working in the emergency situations like in ER or labor rooms. A few glimpses from the workshop. This is our lecture hall where we do the workshop, and the students are doing CPR. Here they are trying to insert the airway, Giddle's airway, and head tilt and chin lift model. And this is neonatal resuscitation. So the conclusion of my study is, well-defined and structured hands-on training is an effective way of improving skills of medical students, midwives, and healthcare professionals, and may reduce maternal mortality in Pakistan. The secret to the success of any medical workshop lies in the effective transfer of knowledge from the faculty to the participants. The aim of healthcare education is to produce competent healthcare practitioners who are capable of providing the highest level of safe care to their patients. Thank you so much.
So I'll move on. Our next speaker is Dr. Aisha. She's a senior registrar, Shalimar Hospital. She'll be speaking about evolving post-graduation training system meeting international standards. Dr. Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So just before I head towards my presentation, I just want to share my own experience. After completing my training, I took the exam, FCPS exam, and had an experience of giving the MRCOG Part 2 exam right after that 2 months of my FCPS completion. So I noticed while preparing for both exams, I noticed a similar course and the syllabus, and moreover the competencies of CPSP and RCOG is also quite similar, although not identical. So the idea came across my mind that if the course is similar, the syllabus is similar, and the competency skills we achieve during the 4 years of training is similar, so why can't our degrees are? I hope that mostly you will agree with this statement. So luckily this platform has provided with me the opportunity to share some of my perspectives on how to evolve the postgraduate training system to meet our international recognition and the systems. So here I am, Dr. Aisha Shahid, presenting about these perspectives and ideas. We all are aware that many Pakistanis are leaving the Pakistan and moving abroad, including the many doctors. These are the stats of 2023, where more than 3,000 of the doctors has embarked towards the abroad journey for the further clinical progression and training and education. So this is causing the brain drain in Pakistan, and if our degrees get the international recognition, we can easily reduce this trend. So we need to establish the certain goals for this so that we can achieve how we are going to achieve that. One of the goals is to get the international recognition, which can be done by evaluating and aligning with the global standards, our own training education system, the collaborating with the international bodies for the best practices. And other thing is to establish the partnership for the mutual recognition. IRC is also one of the platform for that mutual recognition. Another thing is the global frame recognition for the framework with the validation and the MT exchange program, which is already in progress. The next thing is we can incorporate the international feedback for the refinement of our training systems and medical education. And we can advocate this perspective on the international forums and showcasing the success stories that how we can have the exchange programs and how we can globalize our education system. So after searching the different databases, including the PubMed and all the things, and going through the websites of the Royal College and American College of Gynae, moreover the Canadian and the General Medical Council as well, many of the articles are narrowed down, and so I got the evidence from there after studying all of these articles. So before I discuss the proposal, whenever we need to get some proposals, we need to step back and check where are we lacking and what are the loopholes in our system, so that first to accomplish them and then to move forward. So this is the study has been done by the Malik et al. In 2023, stating about the attribution of the failures among the postgraduate residents in their exit fellowship examination, which is CPSP, FCPS examination. So there are many of the perspectives and the attributions and determinants which includes are the weak theoretical background of the students, inadequate clinical case practice, poor confidence, and unfortunately the examiner's perspectives and behavior is also one of the factors in failing the students. So we need to work on that, and the proposals include defining the matrix of progression for our PGship training, just like the RCUG has updated their matrix of progression the last year back in August 2024. Another thing is the incorporating the annual review of competence and the progression. Continuous professional development program can also be included in our training program, and another idea is about the virtual supervisors. So the most important thing is to foster the teaching skills, and this is a crucial point, doing the training of the trainers so that they must be empowered with the enough skill to train others. This is for the comparison, the snapshot of the RCOG as well as the CPSP competency chart, which is almost similar, and we are already achieving the same competency skills and the trainees, and I hope that you all will agree about that. And our plus point is that we are having the more hands-on as compared to the European population. So in this conference on the Monday, pre-conference workshop has already been done on the human factor and the non-technical skills of the surgeon. One thing we are good is about our training and competency and skills, right? But we need to empower our residents and our doctors with the cognitive and interpersonal skills as well, because today's doctors are tomorrow's consultants. And we need to empower them, because doctors are not only now clinicians, but also decision maker, researchers, leadership, and they also work in the management as well. Another important thing is that for every person, not for the trainee themselves, there must be the continuous professional development. And if we see the other international training programs and matrix of progression, they have added in their e-log books about the reflective practices. We can check about their templates, and we can add the reflective practice in our e-log book as well, because it is important to develop a culture of continuous improvement. One must, if anything bad happens during the training, if any complication, we know what happens. We all know what happens with that trainee. So, and that is then get undermined. So instead of that, I think we need to empower our residents to put it down in the e-log book with the confidence that yes, this was the mistake, I had reflected upon that, and that must not be done again, and how I am going to improve the quality of care. Another important thing is to incorporate the annual review of competence progression, how this is going to improve our training. This needs to be done because it ensures the continuous evaluation and progression of our postgraduate training system. What is the purpose of that? We need to incorporate it annually with the average year, so that our trainees, we must ensure that our trainee has achieved the required and designated competency and skill of that year. Another idea is to create the platform for the virtual supervisors. This is achievable, and this is doable thing and can be achievable in collaboration with the RCOG. We can use the virtual supervisors across the globe for the remote monitoring of the researches and assessments, as well as the workplace-based assessments, and even being the examiners as well. So how it's going to benefit us? It will improve the efficiency of the trainees, enhance their creativity, give the innovation which is really very needed in the medical education, and moreover building the trust. Last thing is, although the MTA exchange program is already in progress and many Pakistanis are going for that, but we need to have the global exchange program not only with the UK, but also with other countries as well. Wherever there are the proposals, the limitation find their ways, but I hope that the visionary leadership of the IRC, the CPSP and the RCOG can come across all of these challenges and can overcome them. So let's translate our words into the action so that we can make a globally recognized and competent medical education system with the exchange program by empowering our residents and framework facilitating for the excellence. Thank you.
So I'll request my next speaker, Dr. Rabab Khalid, who's consultant OBGYN, Horizon Hospital, Johor Town, has special interest in medical education and artificial intelligence, also has a blog to help MRCOG aspirants.
Thank you, Dr. Mariam, for the introduction. Have you ever attended a Zoom session? Please raise your hands. And have you ever played video games? Almost everyone. So when you look at my topic, it looks some fascinating words, but actually it's a very, very simple topic. And my topic of the talk is gamification in online synchronous learning for postgraduate students in OBS and gynecology. And this research was conducted as part of my master's thesis. So basically, the background for my research is, what is gamification? So we all know that world is not the same after 2020, and online teaching and learning is becoming a norm. And it's very challenging to keep students engaged, motivated, and to enhance learning. So we need to find out new modalities so that the online teaching and learning can become effective. So gamification is one of the modalities, and by gamification we mean use of game design elements in non-gamified settings. And previous research has shown that gamification can be a useful tool for enhancing the retention of knowledge and enhancing the learning of students. Why this research was needed? Because when I did the literature search, I found that different specialties are adapting the new innovations, but there is a lack of studies in obstetrics and gynecology. Hence, this study was conducted, and this study was purely online. So main research question for this gamification was that, does gamification in online sessions affect learning performance of postgraduate students in obstetrics and gynecology? This was a purely experimental study, and there were two groups. One was experimental and one was control group. The sampling was done by non-convenience probability technique. The method of this study was that first the students were recruited, and I'll show you in the next slide how we did the whole data collection process. Online synchronous sessions were conducted using Zoom, and control groups had sessions with only PowerPoint, whereas the experimental group, their learning was assessed with the help of gamification using the tool called Kahoot. How many of you are familiar with Kahoot? Good. So there are a few hands. So they were assessed with the help of Kahoot. And we assessed their learning with the help of pre-test and post-tests. And data analysis was done using the SPSS version 26. So there is an overview of the data collection. First, we recruited the participants, and we did the promotion through social media, through Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp groups. Informed consent was taken from the participants, and their baseline knowledge was assessed with the help of pre-test 1 week before the sessions. The course syllabus was meticulously selected. 4 modules were selected from obstetrics and gynecology, and they were aligned with the intended learning outcomes. And the assessment was conducted through Google Forms, as this was purely online study. The groups were randomized into two groups. One was experimental, the other was control group using the randomizer app. And then we maintained WhatsApp groups for the better communication with both the groups. And both groups had 4 online sessions each. The material which was used was same. The only difference was that the experimental group was assessed using Kahoot, whereas the control group was assessed using the built-in poll feature of Zoom meetings. And then a post-test was conducted through Google Forms. The results showed, regarding the gender, as we know, the obstetrics and gynae is predominantly a female specialty, so 95% of participants were females, whereas 5 were male. Regarding the age, the mean age was 35 years, with a range of 26 to 52 years. Most of the participants from Pakistan, which was 75%, followed by India, Burma, and Sudan. 51% of participants were in the control group and 49% were in experimental group, because we had 81 participants. 64% of participants attended all 4 sessions. 16% participants attended 3 sessions because it had affected their learning as well. And this is the main variable which we assessed, how much did they learn after the online sessions. When we compared the pre-test and post-test scores, it was found that both the groups had significant improvement in the scores, which showed that overall online sessions were effective in learning. Interestingly, we found that there was no significant difference in the baseline knowledge of both experimental and control group, which showed that they had similar baseline knowledge to start with. But in the post-test group of experimental group, their learning acquisition was lower. So there might be some issues with their post-test scores, which I'm going to explore in the next slide. So there are a few issues were found. There could be because of the timing, as we conducted the Zoom polls at intervals, so people were more interested and more willing to participate in that, whereas Kahoot was conducted towards the end of the session, so probably there was Zoom fatigue, which is a known phenomenon. And Kahoot is an unfamiliar platform for most of the people, and you need to have good internet connection, you need to use second device, so that could have affected the experimental group's performance. And learning styles, this learning style might not be suitable for everyone, and the Kahoot creates a sense of competition, so this might have hampered their learning performance. And in the Kahoot, all the questions were displayed, 10 questions were displayed at random. So maybe probably there was a cognitive overload, whereas in Zoom polls, 1 question was displayed at a time. So this had led to the findings that we need to work on more, and we need to do further studies so that we can find how we can make it more effective and enjoyable for our participants. To conclude my study, overall, the online synchronous sessions, they were useful in acquiring the knowledge, and Kahoot gamified group had comparatively less improvement in their learning performance as compared to the control group. And this could be because of complex interplays, and implementation of gamification in medical education is challenging, especially in a busy field like obstetrics and gynecology. This concludes my talk. Thank you very much for listening.
So my next speaker is Dr. Humaira Noreen. She's the head of department in Gynae Unit 2, Holy Family Hospital, and our Rawalpindi Medical University. She'll be speaking to us behind the complaints, unpacking the lapses in professional behavior among gynae residents in Pakistan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First, I will like to congratulate Professor Nazli on holding such a successful summit, and appreciate all those who are sitting in the last session and the last moment. This is basically a qualitative research behind the complaints, unpacking the lapses in professional behavior among the gynae residents in Pakistan. As you all know that the things are changing and now there are more litigations and there are more complaints. So the basic idea was to explore the reasons behind these complaints from the perspective of three main stakeholders. The first one are obviously the residents, and the second one are the consultant, on-call consultant, that is the senior registrar, and third one are the patients and family. This is the layout of my study. So let's see the conflicting statements of three stakeholders. The residents say, we are not machines, we are humans. While the consultants say, resident hona koi jurm to nahi, and while the other says, resident came into gynae specialty by choice. And while the patient and the family say, they just throw the patient in the labor room and do not pay attention to them. So these conflicting statements, they raise a lot of questions. So the motivation behind this study are the increasing number of the complaints against the gynae resident in Pakistan Citizen Portal. And all these complaints, they raise a lot of questions. And why it is happening? Is this the true reflection of what's happening? Do we have the evidences? What does residents say about this? And should we get opinion from the consultant and the patients as well? So my research questions are, what are the factors and the reasons leading to lapses in professional behavior of the gynae residents from the perspectives of patient, their family, consultant, and the residents themselves in the Pakistani context? This is an exploratory qualitative research which was conducted in the 2 public sector hospitals over the period of 6 months, and the study was conducted in the 3 phases. In the first phase, the document of the PCP complaints were analyzed, and on the basis we designed a questionnaire for the semi-structured in-depth interviews for the 3 separate groups. And after the expert validation and the pilot testing, these interviews were conducted by the third-party researcher in the second phase. And in the third phase, all interviews, they were transcribed, coded, analyzed, and then we found out the reasons. As this is a qualitative research, so we follow the steps of thematic analysis. The total interviews conducted were 33, 11 interviews per group. Now coming towards the results, this pictorial chart, it shows the codes, sub-themes, and the themes. And as you can see, this is our first group, that is the patient and the family, and we extracted the four themes from this group. The consultants are our second group, and we extracted 5 themes from this group. While the resident, which is the main stakeholder, we extracted the 6 themes from them, and you can well appreciate the richness of the data which we obtained from their interviews. So all the sub-themes and the themes, they were compared to find out the similar perspective, and we extracted the 6 overlapping themes. On the right side, you can well appreciate that the workplace challenges, the personal factors, and the patient characteristics, they were appreciated as one of the reasons of professional lapses by all the 3 stakeholders. Interestingly, organizational and administrative and the stressful specialty, gynae as a stressful specialty, was only acknowledged by the consultant and residents. And the last one is the cultural, and which is reported only by the patients and family and the residents. Now coming towards the discussion. Although the study was based on the PCP complaints, but just to reconfirm what's happening, we asked again the same question in the interview, and interestingly, all the stakeholders, they agree that the poor verbal and the rude behavior of the gynae residents is the most reported lapse. This looks a little busy slide, but I will make a little simpler for you. On the right side, you will see the statements, and I have given the color codes. The green is for the consultant, and the blue is for the patient, and the pink is for the residents. So our study proves that the excessive workload, lack of facilities, unsuitable working condition, load of mismanaged complicated referrals, lack of support from the staff, and the illiteracy of the patients and the attendants, they are the major factor behind the lapses in professional behavior. Furthermore, the lack of responsibilities or ill-defined responsibilities of the resident, they added fuel on fire. As our residents, they used to work for 32 to 36 hours, and they have no time for the meal and the sleep. So it is an expected behavior to get irritated, but it is not acceptable. So our study also highlighted the unique stresses which are associated only with the gynae specialties that the resident have to deal with the two lives, that is the mother and the baby. And as we all know that most of our women, they are pregnant women, they are not empowered, and they are dependent on the attendants for their decision making. So the non-cooperative attitude of the attendants, it further increases the anxiety and stress of the residents when they want to take some beneficial decision for their patients. Then obviously, the competency has a very vital role to deal with the complex situation, and this is the reason our newly inducted residents, they are more prone for the behavioral lapses because they are not trained and they are not prepared for these complex situations. The emerging theme of our study are the patient characteristics, and they have the pre-mindset about the certain treatments as evident from one of the statements on the right side, which was stated by the resident that the patients wants doctor to do their undue operations. Another factor was that the resident have the poor understanding of the different cultural needs of the patients. For example, patients coming from the Gilgit-Baltistan or Pakhtun family. And one is the most important, I think the most important factor is the organizational and the administrative support, as we are all working in a public sector hospital with huge load of the mismanaged referral and critical patients, so it is one of the most important reasons for behavioral lapses. Other one is that the patient, they do not have the clear understanding about the roles and responsibility of the resident. According to them, the provision of the bed is also the responsibility of the resident. So our study highlighted also few issues which are related to the Pakistani context, and the first one is the labor room related issues. As you all know that it is a norm that a young pregnant lady is accompanied by the older women of the family, like the grandmother or the mother-in-law, which act as a mean of miscommunication between the patient, between the doctor and the husband. And our study also proves that most of the residents and the consultant, they reside in a joint family system because they need the support of the joint family system. And sometimes the in-laws did not realize the demands of their specialty, and they have to depend on the expensive housemaids. So our recommendations are there should be mentoring scheme to train the juniors and the paramedical staff. We should consider the supporting working condition, and the government should design the policies to deal with the specificities of the gynae specialty, and there should be information sheet describing the rights and responsibility of the patient, and for the last few years I have seen that these are usually mounted in the hospitals. So the uniqueness of the study, we took the perspective of 3 key stakeholders, and the limitation is that although our patients are matriculation by education, but it is difficult for them to understand the construct, and there is a social desirability bias as well. For the future research, it should be multi-center involving both the public and the private sector hospital, and the other key stakeholders are the paramedical staff and the hospital administration and the senior consultant of the gynae unit. So to conclude, there are many factors behind the lapses in professional behavior of the gynae residents, and the 6 more important are highlighted in this picture. And my take-home message is from one of the verses from the Holy Quran in the Surat Al-Baqarah, Qulu linnasi husna, and speak to the people kindly. These are my references. Thank you so much.
So our next speaker is Dr. Humaira Bilkis, Associate Professor OBGYN, Holy Family Hospital and Rawalpindi Medical University. She'll be speaking about Self-Help Plus Intervention, a useful tool to improve workplace performance of female postgraduate medical residents.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I want to thank Professor Nazli for providing us with this prestigious forum to present our research. Thank you, madam. So I am going to discuss about a very sensitive and important topic also related to the residents, and that is the work-related stress. And also an intervention that can be helpful for stress coping in our residents. So this is the intervention Self-Help Plus, that is a useful tool to improve workplace performance of the female residents. As you all know, stress has become a global epidemic. About 50 to 80% of the masses are facing stress one way or the other. What is stress? It is a response by an individual comprising of psychological, physiological, and behavioral manifestations when one perceives an imbalance between the demands placed on them and their ability to meet these demands over a prolonged period of time. So, what is work-related stress? Whenever there is increased job requirements that do not meet the ability, needs, and resources of an individual, it leads to the work-related stress. So there is a huge list of factors that lead to stress in our postgraduate residents, and ultimately it leads to academic failures. So there are multiple coping strategies, both informal and formal, and individual level and organizational level, that are being used by the residents. And the one which we studied was the Self-Help Plus course. What is Self-Help Plus? It is a low-intensity intervention introduced by WHO in 2013 for stress management in any type of adversity. It has already been recommended for certain populations like asylums and refugees and other people who face adversity, but it has never been used for the doctors or residents. So this is a course in which this course uses pre-recorded audios and illustrated guide that makes this format a very convenient, and any supervised non-specialist can even work as a facilitator after a short training course, and the facilitator can guide a group of people that may be up to 30, or it can be in the smaller groups as well. So what are the components? There are two main components of this course. One is the audio course and the other one is the illustrated guide. The audio course spans over 5 weekly sessions that last for 90 to 100 minutes per session, and also the illustrated guide also reinforces all those stress coping skills that are taught in the audio course. So each session is related to one skill. So I will briefly introduce it, that the skill number 1 is grounding. What is meant by grounding? It is noticing our thoughts and feelings during emotional storm, slowing down, connecting to your body, refocusing, and engaging with the world around you. The second skill is unhooking. That is to notice that a difficult thought or feeling has hooked you. Name that difficult thought. For example, here is a difficult feeling. I am not feeling good. I am feeling anger. And then to refocus on what you are doing and get unhooked from that stressful thought. The third skill is acting on your values. That is, you have to choose the values that you want to keep always with you. And you want to be there. Everyone has some type of value that one wants to stick a whole of his or her life. So decide that value and stick to it even in cases of emotional storms and stress. The fourth skill is being kind, not only to the others but to yourself as well. Then the fifth skill is making room. That is to notice the difficult thought or feeling, focus the attention on it, name that difficult thought, and keep that thought in a separate room. And allow the painful feeling or thought to come and go like a weather, and just go for your life. So why did I decide to do research on this? It was my master's thesis for medical education as well. The thing was that there was a higher unmet mental health needs. There was scarcity of data, especially related to the interventional studies. And this Asset Plus course could be proved to be a scalable intervention for our residents and other junior doctors as well. So I started my study with the objectives of determining the effects of Self-Help Plus intervention on improving the workplace performance by reducing the stress levels of the residents, and secondly, to explore their experiences and challenges faced by these residents during that intervention. So the study was a mixed method design, and the quantitative part was a true experimental study, randomized pre-test, post-test control group type, and the qualitative was the phenomenology type. So it was conducted at a tertiary care hospital in Rawalpindi over a period of 6 months on the female residents. Only the female residents were included of 5 major disciplines: medicine, surgery, gynae and obs, peds and anesthesia. These were the disciplines in which the residents are mostly under stress. And we included 2nd to 4th year of residents. Those residents who have any type of history of psychiatric or mental disorder, neurological illness, they were excluded. And if someone misses more than one session out of those 5 sessions, that were also excluded. These were the study instruments. One was the perceived stress scale performer, and the other was the resident's self-assessment regarding their work performance. So randomization was done, and we randomized the residents into 2 groups. One was the intervention group, to which this asset course was given, and the other was the control group, in which traditional usual care in the form of few sessions that are already being given that was included. So these are few images from our workshops that were conducted, and you can see this is our facilitator. Fortunately, we have a psychologist with us, so she conducted those sessions. So coming on to the results, we included the residents. They were almost similar in demographic characteristics. At the beginning, there were 65 participants, but after the dropouts and a few other selection criteria, the final analysis was done, 30 in each group. So paired sample t-test was run for comparison of pre-test and post-test data on stress and academic performance. And you can appreciate that there was a significant difference with significant p-value between the pre-test and post-test of group A, to which Asset Plus was given. And this was both in the perceived stress levels and the resident assessment levels. The qualitative data was collected by focus group discussion, and the main themes were extracted by going through the proper method. The themes identified were that residency is a stressful part of the professional life. There are unmet needs of residents for stress management. Asset Plus skills were found to be effective coping strategies, but it was a challenging task to attend those sessions. Practical implementation was the future. Then qualitative data showed few quotes are here, where the residents identified that some people say that our help is our insight. As it was a sensitive issue, so ethical considerations were taken care of, informed consent was taken, and we arranged for the referral to the specialist psychologist or psychiatrist in case of need, but fortunately no one needed it, and confidentiality was maintained from the beginning till the end. So conclusions are that the female postgraduate residents are facing a lot of specific stresses during their residencies. Stress has a negative effect on their workplace performance during their valuable academic years. There is high unmet need for mental health services, especially among these working women, and self-help interventions may be helpful in improving their stress and workplace performance if included as a part of curriculum or as longitudinal activities throughout their residencies. There were many strengths, especially that it was a novel intervention that can be scalable, and it was a mental health issue that should be discussed. The main limitation was that it was a small size study, and recommendations are that larger experimental studies of medium-term and long-term follow-ups should be carried out, and the self-help interventions should be included as a part of the curricula. So the take-home message is that we must never underestimate stress among the residents, and we should consider introduction of these coping strategies to the residents at the very beginning of their careers. So these are my references. Thank you so much.
So thank you everyone again for being here at the end of the day, and I really wanted to appreciate your presence here. So the last talk of the session is from Professor Safia Sultana. She's a professor of OBGYN, Shalimar Hospital, Lahore. She'll be talking about awareness among Pakistani students regarding age-related fertility decline. So I guess she's very popular.
Thank you, Dr. Rajli, for giving me the chance. I am her colleague, and I have witnessed her hard work, dedication, determination for such a successful summit. Everybody is so happy for the content and for the arrangement and for the discipline. I really congratulate you. In addition to OBGYN, I am also IVF consultant. So my topic is slightly different from the medical education, but it involves the educating of the public. So I daily encounter the patients. They are getting married at 35, 37 years age, and when I look at their reports of the ovarian reserve, they are already really gone down. And when I interview why you have been married so late, and various reasons they are risen, and then I came across a study that was carried out in Israel, and it was also about that is fertility myth, that is what is the awareness of our university students. So I replicated that study, I carried it over here, and I compared the awareness of the medical students, that is the health professionals, and to the social sciences, that is Punjab University. I went over there. So, So a little bit of background, that is fertility in both males and females declines with the age. And for the females, this decline starts from the early 30s, and then it increases by the late 30s. And there is no time that is yet decided when this fertility decline, but many health authorities, they consider that is that 35 is the cutoff point. After 35, the pregnancies they occur, they are considered to be late, and the pregnancies which are occurring after 45 or 40, they are very late. So parenthood globally is being delayed, and the number of the first-time mothers, they are all-time high after 35 years of age in the recent decades. And there are various contributing factors that were explored. They were career establishment, higher education, and the lack of awareness about the decline. That is the major factor, and that is present in our population. So research that was carried out in the USA, Sweden, and Israel have examined the university awareness of the fertility decline. And from these studies, they came to the conclusion that more than 55% of undergraduate and the postgraduate students, they overestimate the likelihood of the woman becoming pregnant as they age. Pakistan adolescents, they have very little reproductive as well as the sexual health, very little studies they have been carried out, and you will see the results that is over in my studies, as we compare to the although European students, they also overestimated, but our students, they were very exaggerating the results, that is women can get pregnant as they age. So they are, women, they are unaware of the consequences of the delaying the parenthood, that it may lead to the voluntary fertility. And the media also overemphasizes the success rates of the assisted reproduction, especially the actresses getting children at very late age. And it is very unrealistic. So the primary focus of the previous studies was they usually carried out the studies, what are the chances of spontaneous pregnancies at various age groups, and very few studies were present because now it is the era for sister production. What is the success rate of various age groups of women getting pregnant? So my study, the focus was to raise the awareness about age-dependent fertility rate as well as to influence the behavior regarding postponing marriage and the parenthood. So my study addresses the four main questions. One was, are Pakistani students aware, both male and female, that is their age-related fertility decline? Second was, are Pakistani students aware that is there is also age-related decline in assisted reproduction? And how do the students, they perceive that is various modalities, that is surrogation, egg donation, and health style modifications or hormone, can they help very late pregnancies, that is beyond 40 or 60? And what are the students' perspective on the factors contributing to the late marriages in Pakistan? So the study is designed that we distributed the performa to the 300 students, and the academic year was 2023 to 24, and the fourth year and final year students of SMDC and Pharmaceutical Sciences of Punjab University, and there was also the social sciences and cultural and English literature. So we involved the questionnaire was designed specifically for the study, and we replicated the research that was carried out by the Israeli author, that is Heschel in 2011, and the similar question was constructed by little adaptations according to our population. And to construct the questionnaire, the results, that is percentages of our response, that was compared to the already established medical data, and that was derived from these author studies, that is Dunson et al., Weitzenberg, as well as the Lemper. So questionnaire, I personally distributed with the help of my residents to the students, and 10 minutes were given for this completion of this. We gave little bit of briefing, and the response was 89.3%. That is totally 268 students, they completed. Some of them they left, and some of them they did not complete that. And so the questionnaire, the sections, the first was demographic data about their age, that is the field of study, or what they think was the cause of the delay in the marriage. And second was, that is, what do they estimate is the fertility rate for spontaneous pregnancy at the time of ovulation if the couple is living together. And we divided the age into the 6 groups, that is 20 to 25, and then you can see the 6 groups up till 50 years. Their response was in percentages from 0 to 100%. For example, if between the 20 to 25 years, what do they think if the couple is living together, the chances of pregnancies are? They will respond in percentages, and that percentage will be from 0 to 100%. And the C part was, similarly we divided the age groups into the 6, and their response, what do they think in the different 6 age groups is the success of the IVF. And then there was a fourth, that was the 4 core themes that we included, and this was an open question, and they have to respond in frequencies. What do they think that is the chances of late pregnancies in 40s, in the 60s, if they use the various surrogacy, egg donation, and the lifestyle modification. So these were the 4 main questions. And the analysis was, we use SPSS version 27, and we use independent sample t-test as well as the one sample t-test. And the calculated and reported frequencies and percentage in the 4th section was given. So demographic data, you can see that is 80% that was the female students, and 19.4 were the male. And the mean age was, that was between the 22.4. And the field of studies, the health sciences studies combined the medical education, that is MBBS, as well as the pharmaceutical sciences, they constituted 64.4%, and the social sciences, that was 33.3%. And mostly they were 4th year or final year students, and the 97.8% were single, but 2.2% were also married, and 0.7% also had kids. So you can see that is the first is the 6 age groups, and we compared their response to the already established medical data. You can see at all the age groups, there was the overestimation. That is, between the 20 to 25, there was a significant there was overestimation. And similarly, when we divided into male and female, male were over-exaggerating, overestimating. And as surprisingly, you can see health sciences students were more ignorant. They were overestimating the chances of the pregnancy as compared to the other students who were studying English literature or cultural sciences. Similarly, when we studied this, that is, what are the success over the different age group, if they use the IVF, they were very over-enthusiastic. Up till 36 years, 35 years, they were realistic, but after that, that was exaggerated response. That is, the woman, even there, 53, 50, they are capable of getting pregnant with the use of IVF and assisted reproduction. And, but in the male and the female, the response was overestimated. There was no difference in IVF results. And health sciences and social sciences were also not significant difference. The response was similar. The fourth was that we wanted to study what do they think that is the woman can get pregnant in the late 40s and 60s. And 73 and 75% they said that that was realistic, that they can get pregnant if they use this. But over-enthusiastic, that is healthy lifestyles in late 40s and 60s, with the aid of this modalities, they get pregnant. That is not realistic. So overestimation of spontaneous conception observed across all age groups, and estimates were 4 to 5 times higher for the advanced ages. And findings are consistent with the studies that were carried out USA, Israel, Sweden, as well as the New Zealand. So this is the study that we replicated. Israel student, that was the 410, and as you can see, they also compared medical data, and significantly they overestimated and exaggerated. And New Zealand students, they were even more unrealistic, and in different age groups, they overestimated. And in the American students, that is, they were also unrealistic about this. I will conclude my studies. So gender and academic background comparison, both genders, they overestimated, and the students' new pregnancies in the 40s and 60s are possible by egg donation and surrogacy, but overemphasize the role of the healthy lifestyle. Limitation that the sample size is not representative of the whole of the Pakistani population, but it indicates that requires that needs further exploration, particularly among the students from other fields such as the social sciences. Sample composition, predominantly it was the female population. And the importance is that is biological clock for the female is ticking. We have to make awareness, that is, it is the early 30s that decline start, and then it goes on increasing. And so it is very important to give them the information about the informed decision about their career planning, about their education, and when to get parenthood. So recommendation for the educational efforts to counter the fertility myths, the schools, healthcare system, and media should focus on educating young people about fertility realities and dispelling their unrealistic optimism regarding technology such as ART and reproductive that can help in getting pregnant even at the late ages. Thank you very much.